Du Elender. Ich gab dir mein Herz. Ich gab dir meine Seele. Ich gab dir meinen Körper. Und du hast mich einfach weggeworfen, als wäre ich ein Stück Müll.
Ja, mein Fehler.
A grand piano falls out of clear blue sky and crushes a man on a doorstep. No warning, no build-up, just a sudden, absurd, almost cartoonish death. That was how 2.5 Men chose to say goodbye to Charlie Harper, the character who built the entire show, and to the actor who once was a show, Charlie Sheen. For 12 seasons, 2.5 Men was one of the most watched comedies on American television. Then, in the space of about 6 weeks in early 2011, it became something else entirely. A real-life spectacle bigger than the sitcom itself. Today we're going to walk through how a hit multi-camera comedy about a jingle writer, his uptight brother, and a nephew stuck in the middle became the backdrop for one of the strangest public breakdowns in Hollywood history. And why, more than a decade later, the door on a full reboot still hasn't reopened. 2.5 Men premiered on CBS in the fall of 2003, created by Chuck Lorre and Lee Aronson. The premise sounds almost quaint by today's standards. Charlie Harper, a wealthy, commitment-phobic jingle writer, has his life upended when his newly divorced brother Alan and Alan's son Jake move into his Malibu beach house. It was a classic odd couple setup dressed in a beachfront view, built for the kind of broad, joke-a-minute rhythm that CBS had built its comedy brand around for decades. What made the show click wasn't really the premise, though it was the casting. Charlie Sheen, coming off a career built on both blockbuster comedies and darker dramatic work, brought a loose, effortlessly charming energy to Charlie Harper that felt less like acting and more like a man playing a slightly exaggerated version of himself. John Cryer, as a neurotic, endlessly unlucky Alan, gave the show its emotional gravity and its best physical comedy. And Angus T. Jones, cast as Jake when he was still a kid, grew up on camera in a way audiences got genuinely attached to. The show found its footing fast. It became appointment viewing on Monday nights, a rare live audience multi-camera sitcom that thrived in an era when single-camera mockumentary style shows were becoming the industry's new obsession. Critics were never especially kind to it. Plenty of reviews called it broad, predictable, even crude, but audiences didn't care. By its third and fourth seasons, 2.5 Men was routinely CBS's highest-rated comedy, and its lead actor was becoming one of the highest-paid performers on American television. Here's the thing that made 2.5 Men different from most sitcoms. The gap between the actor and the character kept shrinking. Charlie Sheen had lived a famously turbulent life well before he ever took the role, a young Hollywood star of the 1980s who battled substance abuse on and off for years, including a well-documented 1998 overdose. When he stepped into the role of a hard-partying bachelor with no interest in commitment, viewers didn't just see a performance. They saw an echo of the tabloid version of Sheen they already thought they knew, and that echo became part of the show's appeal. Audiences loved watching someone who seemed to be having exactly as much fun off camera as his character was having on it. For years, that dynamic worked in the show's favor. It made Charlie Harper feel dangerous and alive in a way that scripted television rarely manages. But it also meant that when Sheen's real life started spinning out of control, there was no clean line anymore between the actor's problems and the show's problems. Whatever happened to Charlie Sheen the person was, in the eyes of the public and eventually the press, also happening to the show. By 2010, 2.5 Men was entering its 8th season, and Sheen was already earning close to $825,000 an episode. An enormous sum for network television, but apparently not enough. When it came time to negotiate a new deal, Sheen and his team reportedly pushed for roughly $2 million per episode, a number that would have made him, by a wide margin, the highest-paid actor on television. CBS and Warner Brothers, the studio producing the show, balked. The two sides went back and forth for weeks, with each side publicly and privately signaling that they weren't going to blink first. Eventually, a deal did get done. Sheen secured a substantial raise, reportedly close to that figure once bonuses and back-end profit participation were factored in, cementing his status as the highest-paid actor in television history at the time. But the negotiation left scars. It hardened positions on both sides and, according to people close to production, deepened tension between Sheen and Chuck Lorre, the man who had built the show around him in the first place. What should have been a triumphant new contract instead became the first crack in a relationship that was about to shatter completely. Even as ratings held strong, the mood on set was reportedly deteriorating. Sheen's history with substance abuse, which had briefly resurfaced over years, became harder to ignore. There were reports of him arriving on set in no condition to work, of scenes being hastily rewritten or reassigned to other actors, and a growing friction with Laurie over the direction of the writing. Laurie had a habit of including short, personal messages, vanity cards, at the end of each episode, and some of those messages started to read like veiled commentary on what was happening behind the scenes. None of this stayed contained for long. On Christmas Day of 2009, Sheen was arrested following a domestic dispute with his then-wife, Brooke Mueller, an incident that led to another stint in rehab and a wave of renewed scrutiny on his personal life. It was a serious, sobering event, and yet the show went on, the ratings held, and CBS kept airing episodes as if the storm had passed. It hadn't. January 2011 is where the story turns from troubled star to something the entertainment press would spend years trying to fully explain. CBS and Warner Brothers suspended production so Sheen could seek treatment. Instead of quietly stepping back, Sheen went the opposite direction, publicly, loudly, and repeatedly. Reports described days of partying that ended with a hospitalization, followed almost immediately by a wave of media appearances in which Sheen seemed to be daring the world to look away. He didn't get the reaction he may have expected. He got the opposite. In a string of radio and television interviews in February 2011, Sheen unloaded on Chuck Lorre directly, using insulting language and mocking Laurie's background in a way many considered openly offensive. He described himself in increasingly outlandish terms, invoking tiger blood, claiming a kind of superhuman invincibility, and coining the phrase that would follow him for the rest of the decade. Winning, he challenged Laurie to a fight. He bragged openly about drug use in terms that stunned even seasoned entertainment reporters. Clips circulated instantly online, and what might have stayed a private crisis became, almost overnight, a defining pop culture moment of 2011. Sheen leaned into it rather than away from it. He joined Twitter in early March and picked up followers at a pace that broke platform records at the time. Proof that no matter how alarming his behavior looked from the outside, there was an enormous audience that couldn't stop watching. That, in a strange way, was the problem. The chaos wasn't hurting his visibility. If anything, it was making him more famous than the show ever had. For CBS and Warner Brothers, the calculation eventually flipped. What had been a ratings asset was turning into a liability that threatened production itself, cast, crew, and the hundreds of people whose jobs depended on the show continuing to function. On March 7th, 2011, Warner Brothers formally terminated Sheen's contract. The studio's letter to him was blunt, describing behavior considered dangerous, unprofessional, and potentially damaging to the people around him. For a network and studio that had spent years accommodating one of their biggest stars, it was an unusually hard line to draw, and it came at a real cost, with the remainder of the season's episodes scrapped and dozens of crew members left in limbo. Sheen didn't go quietly. Within days, he filed a lawsuit against Warner Brothers and Chuck Lorre seeking an enormous sum in damages, arguing that his firing was unjustified and that he'd been unfairly blamed for problems that went beyond him alone. The dispute eventually moved out of open court and into arbitration, as his contract required, and by the fall of 2011 the two sides had reached a confidential settlement. Neither side ever detailed exact terms publicly, though reporting at the time suggested Sheen walked away with a substantial payout tied to his existing contract and a share of future syndication revenue. A quiet, lawyer-negotiated end to what had been an extremely loud public fight. With its lead actor gone, and a hit show still under contract for new episodes, CBS and Warner Brothers moved fast to find a replacement. Not to play Charlie Harper again, but to introduce someone new into the world of the show. There was reportedly early interest in bringing on a different established star, but those talks fell through just as the network was preparing to present its fall lineup to advertisers, leaving producers scrambling for an answer within days. The solution arrived quickly. Ashton Kutcher, known at the time primarily for his work in film and an earlier hit sitcom of his own, Kutcher signed on to join the cast as a new character, Walden Schmidt, a heartbroken tech billionaire who eventually buys Charlie Harper's beach house. It was a bold swap. Kutcher's fan base skewed younger than the show's existing audience, and there was real doubt about whether viewers who tuned in for over 100 episodes of Charlie Harper would accept an entirely new lead character in his place. The show addressed the transition head-on, rather than pretending it hadn't happened. The season premiere that fall opened with Charlie Harper's funeral, explaining his sudden absence with a dark, almost self-aware joke about his off-screen death, before pivoting into introducing Walden. It was a huge television event. The premiere drew roughly double the show's typical audience, driven largely by curiosity about how the show would handle the loss of its original star. Walden turned out to be a very different kind of character than Charlie had been. Wealthier, but far more emotionally fragile, freshly divorced, and far less confident with women. That contrast gave Jon Cryer's Alan a new dynamic to play against, shifting him from the show's perpetual screw-up into something closer to a mentor figure, which injected a genuinely new energy into a series that could easily have felt like it was just going through the motions. Just as the show seemed to have stabilized around its new lead, it faced an entirely different kind of crisis, this time from the cast member who'd been there the longest. Angus T. Jones had grown up on 2.5 Men, joining as a young child and aging into his late teens on camera, earning a considerable salary along the way. But as he got older, his relationship with the material changed. In late 2012, Jones appeared in a video produced by a religious organization and publicly urged viewers to stop watching the show, calling its content filth and saying he felt like a hypocrite for continuing to appear in it. It was an extraordinary moment, a series regular publicly disowning the show that made him famous, while he was still technically part of its cast. Jones later said the statement grew out a genuine shift in his personal faith and values, and he apologized fairly quickly for how the comments landed with his colleagues, though he never walked back his underlying concerns about the material. The fallout, unsurprisingly, strained his relationships with the rest of the cast and crew. His role on the show shrank dramatically over the following seasons, and by the time the series entered its final year, he had left the regular cast entirely, stepping away from acting to focus on college and other pursuits. By the time 2.5 Men reached its 12th and final season in early 2015, it had already outlived 2 of its original leads in one form or another. One fired amid a public breakdown, one who'd walked away by choice. CBS built real anticipation around the series finale, teasing for months that it would tie up the mystery of what had actually happened to Charlie Harper, whose death had only ever been referenced in passing. Speculation ran wild about whether Charlie Sheen himself might make a surprise appearance, something Sheen himself seemed to enjoy stoking and denying in equal measure on social media in the days leading up to the broadcast. What audiences actually got was stranger than almost anyone predicted. In the closing minutes of the finale, a man resembling Charlie Harper appears at the beach house's front door, only to be crushed instantly by a piano falling from above, an unmistakable nod to classic cartoon gag, and many assumed, a pointed reference to Sheen's own dramatic exit from the show years earlier. Then, in the show's very last shot, the camera pulled back to reveal Chuck Lorre himself sitting in a chair, delivering Sheen's old catchphrase, before a second piano dropped and flattened him too. It was a genuinely bizarre way to end a series that had spent over a decade as one of the most watched comedies in America, and reactions split sharply. Some viewers and critics found it a clever, self-aware final joke about everything the show had been through. Others thought it read as unnecessarily bitter, a parting shot aimed at a former star rather than a proper send-off of the characters audiences had followed for 12 years. Sheen himself, notably, took it in stride publicly, describing the gag as silly but effective when asked about it afterward. The years since the finale have sent the show's core cast in wildly different directions. Charlie Sheen's career never fully returned to its earlier heights. He starred in another sitcom for a couple of seasons that failed to recapture his old audience, and in 2015, he disclosed that he was HIV positive, a revelation that added another layer of public scrutiny to an already complicated life. He's made occasional returns to television since, including guest appearances on projects connected to Chuck Lorre, suggesting the two men eventually found some kind of working peace, even if their falling out was never fully forgotten. Jon Cryer has arguably had the steadiest post-show career of the original trio, picking up major awards recognition for his work as Alan and moving comfortably between comedic and dramatic roles, including a notable turn as a well-known DC villain on television. Angus T. Jones largely stepped away from the spotlight altogether, focusing on education and personal projects rather than chasing further acting work, making only a brief, one-off return for series finale. Ashton Kutcher went on to headline another long-running comedy of his own, and became increasingly known for his business and technology investments outside of acting. More than a decade on, 2.5 Men occupies a strange place in television history. Hugely successful commercially, deeply divisive critically, and permanently associated with one of the messiest real-life dramas to ever play out around a hit sitcom. Talk of a reboot surfaces periodically, as it does for almost every successful show from that era, but it has never gone anywhere concrete. Part of that is practical. The cast lives have diverged so completely that reassembling them feels unlikely, and Cryer in particular has been candid about his reservations regarding a full reunion with Sheen. Part of it is cultural. A show built heavily around Charlie Harper's womanizing sits differently with audiences now than it did in 2003. And part of it is simply that the real story, the contract war, the public breakdown, the firing, the lawsuit, 2 cast departures, and a finale that ended with 2 men getting crushed by falling pianos, turned out to be a far stranger and more compelling